Welcome into another edition of the Stretch Big podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Bigelow, and I have to start off by saying I know it's been been a little over 2 weeks since I dropped the season preview pod with Wilson Moore from the Omaha World Herald. Sometimes life happens. This isn't my full-time job. This is kind of still, and then this, I don't mean the podcast, I just mean the sports stuff in general. It's just something I do on the side. It's not my full-time job, and just sometimes life gets in the way. And unfortunately, that's been the case for the last couple weeks. But it is Sunday, November 17th, as you are hearing this. And that means today at noon, Nebraska takes on St. Mary's at the Sanford Pentagon in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I will be in the building. I'll be making my way up probably as this pod is out on the morning of the 17th. So this is going to be a little longer podcast than usual. Going to recap the early season so far for Nebraska, the 3 bye games. They are 3-0 with wins over UT Rio Grande Valley, Bethune-Cookman, and Fairleigh Dickinson. But now the opposition definitely gets turned up to 11 starting today with a matchup with a very good St. Mary's team, I think, that is definitely on another plane, another level compared to some of the bye games so far and those to come. And then once Nebraska is through today, what looms next? A trip up I-80 to Omaha for the annual intrastate rivalry game with a top 15 team in Creighton on Friday night. There'll be plenty of content to come in the coming week leading up to the Creighton game. We'll have not one, but 2 preview pods of the Creighton game, but it's going to be really fun when we get there. But I wanted to start off by saying, I know it's been a little bit. I have not forgotten about those of you. I've had people asking where the podcast is. I'm here. I'm okay. And the podcast is here. In a perfect world, you are listening to this on I-29, headed north from Omaha, Lincoln, or wherever you may be traveling from to Sioux Falls for this afternoon's game between Nebraska and St. Mary's. So we're going to start off with a little recap of the season so far, and then transition to previewing today's game with St. Mary's, and then wrap up with some other national college basketball storylines that have happened in the early season. I went to a pretty cool game at Allen Fieldhouse more than a week ago now. Won't be able to wax as poetic as I wanted to coming off of that. But that's all that's in store for you. I appreciate you tuning in on this fine morning, or if you're not listening on Sunday, I appreciate you tuning in anytime. So we'll get all the boxes checked. But first, a little word from our sponsor. This season, the Stretch Big podcast is proudly presented to you by Bird Darts, a homegrown Nebraska original golf company and the original premium pack of golf tees. Bird Darts was founded and started by one of the smartest people I know, one of my former coworkers on the Nebraska basketball staff, Brett Sapp, and it has taken off. These things are flying online. They've got the great merch too. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the hat here. I'm not the biggest hat guy, but this hat rocks. And Bird Darts offers premium golf tees, apparel. They even do custom packs. If you've got a company outing, a family outing, you want to do custom packs for, they can amplify that event, amplify your brand, whether for promo, retail. Each of these packs, they have 18 bamboo tees, and they're where you need them to be, in your hand, in your pocket, not in that one random pocket in your bag, spread out, making a mess. And they're sure to break the ice, any group. If you can pull this out of your pocket, they're probably not going to think they're golf tees at first, but that's the point of the design. They're really sleek, really stylish. They're sure to break the ice on the course, whether you're playing with family, friends, or you're just paired up with some strangers and you're just looking to get through that round. So it's time to start expecting more from your golf tees. Join the flock today, birddarts.com. Swing away, folks. So Nebraska is 3-0. They're not 3-0 in a very aesthetically pleasing manner, as anyone who has watched the first couple games of the year can attest. There's definitely still plenty to work on. This Nebraska team is definitely still putting the pieces together, and that's kind of the new normal in college basketball this time of year. I wrote as much for my next column that'll be in Huskers Illustrated magazine. Basketball is different than football. It's such a long season, and not every game has to be a referendum on the season or a referendum on the coach. And I'm not saying football has to be that way, but that's how the discourse surrounding that sport can get all the time. And the overarching theme for Nebraska, in my opinion, if you were to ask me the cliff notes for this Nebraska team, is they can guard. I really do. I really do believe they can guard. And, we're going to see firsthand just how well they can guard later today against St. Mary's. But the question remains, can they score? And especially, can they shoot the three? And Nebraska right now, through 3 games, is sitting at a whopping 24.6% from 3, which is good for 346th in all of college basketball. I believe there are 364 Division I teams. So that is quite bad. That is quite bad. It is the reddest red on Nebraska's KenPom page, which has them at 326. CBB Reference has them at 346. So maybe there's been some movement with the games that took place on Saturday night. But that is kind of the elephant in the room with this Nebraska team. When you think of Fred Hoiberg basketball, you think 5 out, you think pace and space, you think pretty basketball. I mean, pretty is, that comes down to perception, but it's supposed to look a lot different than what it's looked like through 3 games on the offensive end so far for the Huskers. I mean, Bryce Williams is your leading scorer. He's, sitting I believe 15 points per game so far. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, 15.7 points per game for Bryce so far, 13 a game for Juwan Gary, 10 a game for Riley Worcester, and 9.7 for Connor, 9.7 a game for Connor Arcesian. But the 3-point shooting, I mean, that's going to be inevitably, that's going to be the story of the season for this team if it continues to linger any longer. We heard from Fred Hoiberg Wednesday night after the win over Fairleigh Dickinson. He said eventually the lid's going to come off that thing, referring to the hoop, and it's going to be fun because we've heard. I believe when Fred Hoiberg tells me that guys can shoot, I'm going to believe him. This man had a bad heart and led the league in shooting the year before he had to retire after his open heart. The year leading into his retirement due to open heart surgery, he still led the league in shooting. I'm going to trust Fred Hoiberg when it comes to evaluating shooters. And I've kind of said all offseason that I think the ceiling for this group could greatly be affected by, the 3-point shooting of 2 guys. And those 2 guys are Connor Arcesian and Gavin Griffiths. We saw Connor Arcesian go on a little heater at the end of the season opener against UT Rio Grande Valley. Gavin Griffiths, we saw him. I think he played his best in the inner squad. That is when at least that I've seen. But on Wednesday against Fairleigh Dickinson, those 2 guys took the most threes by far. One of them took 6, one of them took 7. The only problem was they both only made 2, and Nebraska as a team, I believe, only made 7 that night against FDU. But this team is far from a finished product. It's still November. We're not even midway through November. We're not to Thanksgiving yet. So any sweeping declarations about this team, I don't think can be made quite yet. And I'm not going to, get on this mic and use a bunch of coach speak cliche platitudes and preach trusting the process or anything like that. I'm not going to, I still don't think this is a basketball team that's going to set the world on fire by any means, at least not early on, because it's still early on. And they look like a team that is still getting used to playing with each other, like a noon ball pickup run at your gym of choice or whatever YMCA you attend, where there's just dudes there to hoop, and they had captains and they picked teams. That guy looks like he can shoot. That guy looks like he can play. And they're still getting used to each other's tendencies, especially on the offensive end. Another glaring thing that I don't think was alleviated in just one game, Nebraska turned the ball over 18 times against Bethune-Cookman. I was not in the building for that game. I went back and watched some of the film. They trimmed that down to 8 turnovers against Fairleigh Dickinson. Your thought is, with 2 true point guards on the roster, that turnovers should not be that off the wall. 18 is a lot, especially against a SWAC team that you only beat by 5. That game definitely raised some eyebrows, definitely raised the eyebrows of the head coach. He alluded to as much in his Monday media availability. But there's a lot of, there's definitely more questions with answers with this team so far. But then again, that's almost with every team in college basketball because it is still November. You're going to hear me harp on that, when looking at, Nebraska's season so far, um, that it's still November. And I'm not here to preach patience, and I'm not going to tell you that this is the team to do it. This is the team that gets that elusive NCAA tournament win, that gets over the hump. But there's still a good amount to like just about the makeup of this team. And I think maybe I trust Fred Hoiberg too much, and people could call me out on that, but I think in the long run there's still a good amount to like about this team. And going to keep it big picture here, when discussing the season so far. I don't want to give you a game by game breakdown of 3 bye games that already happened, so I'm just looking to keep it pretty big picture. I'll start with things that I've liked so far. I think the biggest thing that I've liked in these 3 games for Nebraska is the defensive end. They have not proven, nothing's proven in November, but I really and truly believe that this team can guard. And the analytics are going to be skewed because it's still so early in the season. But right now, Nebraska is a top 30 defense in the country. They are a top 10 turnover defense in the country, and they're not fouling, which they are the number 2 team in the country, according to KenPom, in terms of free throw attempts, allowed defensively. They're playing really, really well on defense. Is that a product of their competition? Fairleigh Dickinson, number 351 in KenPom, Bethune-Cookman, number 272, UTRGV, 233. That definitely plays a part. But with the size and the experience and the makeup of this team, I really think that defense is going to be what keeps them in games. And complementary basketball is defense to offense, offense to defense. And I think once again, this is a Nebraska team where defense is going to have to be the constant. We heard Fred Hoiberg harp on it last season with last year's group, which is a completely different group, from this season. I think in terms of style of play, what the best form of this team is going to look like. I think it's going to be night and day different compared to last year's group, but it was something that he harped on. The defense has to be the constant. And so far, defense has been the only constant, and it's only through 3 games, and it's about to get ratcheted up a notch with St. Mary's and Creighton over the course of the next 5 days. But I've been really, really impressed with the defense so far, and that's on the wings, and on the wings and in the backcourt. The front court, defensively, I still have some questions there because I we'll talk about that later. I'll talk about things I don't like so far. But the things that I do like, number one, far and away, is the defensive intensity and how they just look defensively. I think that's going to be something for Nebraska to build on. Another thing that I've liked so far, and it's this is going to turn into like a stock up, stock down type thing, but the guard depth. This is a deep team. There are 10 viable players on this roster, and after the other night against FDU, there may be 11. But the guards, and that starts with Raleigh Worcester, Aaron Eulis, even Sam Hoiberg, Connor Essegian, and then the other night Cale Jacobson. All these guys have shown that they're viable and that they can play. That's where the most experience on this team is in the backcourt with those guys. They've played the most basketball on this team, especially Worcester and Eulis. They've been around the block, and the guard play is Raleigh has an uncharacteristic 5 turnover game against Bethune-Cookman, but I thought he was really good in the opener against UTRGV. He didn't do a whole lot in the 3rd game against Fairleigh Dickinson, but the backcourt is deep, and I think that's going to be where it becomes the toughest for Fred Hoiberg to whittle down this rotation. When we get closer to Big Ten play, and it gets down to for lack of a better term, nut cutting time. Excuse my language, but when it gets down to that, I think the backcourt's going to be where the most questions of whittling down rotation and minutes comes from, because there's some legitimate depth there that I really like, and I would definitely take stock into. And the third thing that I've liked so far is the how they've finished games. The two that I've been at least. I can't speak for how the Bethune-Cookman game ended because that just looks like a car crash. The highlights that I saw, what I was reading online after the game, listening to the radio broadcast on the road, driving back from a little side quest, travel weekend, that just looked like a car accident. But it wasn't a car accident that resulted in a by-game loss, which hasn't happened in a couple years, but I feel like there's always that stigma with Nebraska basketball this time of year, just people holding their breath and dreading another, incarnate word, Gardner Webb, Sanford, think about how the season started in the first 2 years under Fred Hoiberg, losing to UC Riverside and Western Illinois. I mean, there's all these. The list goes on and on of these, epitome of brutality. Rothstein, there you go. Those type of games, those losses for Nebraska early in the year, and they have not happened yet. I'm not saying they're going to, but even in that stinker of a game against Bethune-Cookman, they finished the game. They won by 5, and in UTRGV and Fairleigh Dickinson games, the game got put away. The door got slammed, and a 20-point win in the opener and a 26-point win at the end, where walk-ons were getting garbage time baskets, toward the end in against Fairleigh Dickinson. This team has shown they can finish games. That's another thing Fred Hoiberg has talked about a lot, like the difference between the group that starts games for you and the group that ends games for you. It doesn't have to be the same group. It's got to trust. You can trust guys to start games. But you got to really, really trust guys to finish games. And twice out of the 3 games so far this year, the groups that have been on the floor for Nebraska have slammed the door, and they have left no doubt when it comes to the results. And once again, that is also a byproduct of the opposition that they've faced so far. But that's something that I've liked. To things that I have not liked, obviously I talked about it at the top. The 3-point shooting, that is the elephant in the room. That is the proverbial monkey on the back of this team, and eventually the water will get turned back on. But how heavy will the water pressure be when the water gets turned back on? Because right now it's almost nothing. It's the little dribbles that you hear late at night when you forgot to turn the faucet all the way. It's just little like plop, plop. That's all it is so far. Nebraska is, I believe, 17 of 69 from 3 on the season. I think that's where you get the percentage from beyond the arc. Yep, they're 17 for 69, 24.6%, and almost a third, more than a third of their threes on the year are from one guy, and that's Connor Esesian. He has made 5 of the 17 threes that Nebraska has made so far this year, and that's not more than a third, but it's around a third. Math was never my strong suit. That's why I do a podcast and attempt to write every now and again. Math was definitely not my thing. But Nebraska as a team has made 17 threes this season. Connor Esesian has made 5 of those 17. So there has been, that is the main focus, the main talking point with any of the Nebraska basketball discourse at the moment is 3-point shooting. Where's the 3-point shooting going to come from? And I think Esesian and Griffiths remain your top 2 candidates. That's going to be what gets them extended minutes, not just in these next 2 games, but in the season as a whole, because that's what they were brought in to do. They're Big Ten guys. They know what it takes to win in the league. They know how the league plays, and the hope, obviously, was that going from playing for Greg Gard and the Wisconsin swing offense and Steve Peichel in the pounding nails offense before lottery picks decided to go to Rutgers, to playing for Fred Hoiberg and his free-flowing, the pretty basketball that I talked about earlier, would have, opened things up for the two of them. And I think those are your 2 leading candidates to be the guys who break out and the water gets turned back on first, is for Connor Esesian and Gavin Griffiths. And then I've got questions about the front court pieces for Nebraska. This will play into the 3-point shooting thing too. But it took until the third game of the season for Berke Butenjel to make his first three of the year. He remains like the Austin Powers movie. He is the international man of mystery on this team. I think we've seen flashes. He's made a ton of nice passes that haven't resulted in assists. He has done a little bit of everything. There's been some good, there's been some bad, there's been some ugly with Berke. He got the start against Fairleigh Dickinson with Braxton Mia out. It kind of, Fred Hoiberg is, he almost like teased the small ball five Berke like going into the season. And then by game 3, they have to roll with it due to injuries and personnel. But it's not just him. The Braxton Mia fit remains very, very head scratching to me. His best game of the season naturally was the game that I was not at, but he started the opener against UTRGV and then he played a little over 10 minutes. That was it. Andrew Morgan comes in against UTRGV. I think he scored like 7 points quickly, showed actual legitimate like post moves, like had some oohs and ahs from the crowd at PBA, and then he gets pulled while he was on a little one-man heater. I don't know who I would say the leader in the clubhouse is for, your 5-man through 3 games. Berke has played the most at that position between the 3, but there's definitely questions about all 3 of them. And I was not expecting like definitive answers this early on, but this is the most legitimate like post depth that Nebraska basketball has maybe ever had. You have a true 7-footer. We have a guy who's all of 6'10" in Berke, and then Morgan, who the whole like, is he the rink mass replacement? Is he the rink mass comp? Like that whole, when he committed in some talk over the summer. I'm looking for. I mean, this is a big week for that group too, with St. Mary's and Creighton coming up. I mean, Creighton, Ryan Kalkbrenner, who had 49 in their season opener, multiple time defensive player of the year in the Big East. I mean, he may be licking his chops with looking at Braxton Mia, Berke, and Andrew Morgan, who had a hell of a time trying to guard Kalkbrenner last year when he was at North Dakota State and they played in Omaha. And then on Sunday in Sioux Falls, I mean, Mitchell Saxon is a tough son of a gun. He's gonna be a problem on the glass for Nebraska. He's 6'10". Harry Wessels is 7'1". They're the 2 main bigs for St. Mary's, and I'll talk about them later in the preview. But this is a big week for the front court, which has, I mean, I think they may be the second biggest. I don't want to say they're the elephant in the room, but with that much, those options, they've definitely left much to be desired in terms of their play on the floor. And lastly, things I don't like: Bryce Williams without a beard. Just the visual of that was almost like a jump scare for those of us that walked into Pinnacle Bank Arena on Wednesday night. But Bryce Williams was also on the struggle bus against FDU. He has a Nebraska career high 27 in the season opener, and then everyone had a clunker against Bethune-Cookman, and he was definitely on the struggle bus against FDU. I think he started 1 of 8, 1 of 9 from the field, but then he scored and assisted on 7 straight points. But I don't know how many clunkers Nebraska can afford Bryce Williams to have. Maybe he's getting them all out of the way early. I mean, I'm sure he's not, but I don't really know, how many games, how many clunkers they can afford from Bryce Williams. Thankfully, against Fairleigh Dickinson, for Nebraska's sake, Juwan Gary, the other 6th-year vocal, senior leader, picked up the slack and had one of his, best overall games as a Husker. So, I mean, big picture, I mean, there's definitely more questions than answers for this Nebraska basketball team, but they have played 3 games. They've played 120 minutes of basketball, and there is so much more to be played. I don't think, you can overreact. You can, I'm just saying, like, keep the lid on the panic button right now. The lid doesn't have to be off. You don't have to be prepared to push it, But that also comes down to what your expectations were for this group, what you thought the ceiling could be, all of that sort of thing. But right now it's still November, and I'm sure people will get it's so weird that this Creighton game is this early, and it being on the 22nd of November when it's usually I feel like it's December 7th or 8th. Like, it's a little too early, and I'm sure that's going to be the first game a lot of people watch, and I'm sure it's going to get plenty of overreaction regardless of result. But it's still too early for overreaction season. I think the final product of this Nebraska team probably won't be known until at the earliest, maybe the end of December, maybe January. I think this team is very, very far from its final form. I don't even think we've seen flashes yet. I don't think they just flat out stink, and I don't think they're the greatest team of all time. They're somewhere in the middle. The truth usually is somewhere in the middle, and I think that's where the truth is for this Nebraska basketball team. So those are the things that I've liked and not liked so far throughout the season. Um, One thing I will say in the Fairleigh Dickinson game, I'll give some kudos to Cale Jacobson. Fred Hoiberg has waxed poetic about Cale Jacobson, his presence on the team, his basketball IQ, his work ethic, and he showed that he's a viable option. Hoiberg said he was the 10th man in a 9-man rotation a season ago. He said multiple times that Cale was very close to cracking the rotation if one more person got injured. And they said right now he's the 11th guy in a 10-man rotation. And I don't think 10-man rotations are really a thing in college basketball. You got to whittle those down. But I mean, Cale Jacobson showed he's viable. I mean, he's at the very least he's going to play. He's going to play hard and he's going to play smart because that's what he's done his entire life. If you watched him play at Ashland Greenwood, if you know anything about his family, he's from a basketball family, and he's a viable option. He's not your typical walk on. He could easily be playing meaningful minutes elsewhere, but I think he's a viable part of this program, and I think he's a really important piece. And I'm sure many people expected in the third game of the season that the three players we would see at the podium were Cale Jacobson, Sam Hoiberg, and Aaron Eulis, but they all played a role in slamming the door on Fairleigh Dickinson, whether it be the hot end to the first half, where Cale and Sam had their moments, or Aaron Eulis. He's kind of my top stock up guy. If I had to do stock up, stock down, from this early in the season, I think my stock may be up the most on Aaron Eulis because this is his. People forget this is his first meaningful college basketball minutes since the 2023 NCAA tournament at Iowa. And, he had his best game against FDU, but he's going to be a guy that's not afraid to get out and push the pace. I think he's definitely the quicker of the 2-point guards. The offense will run faster when he's on the floor, but he's also going to go play through contact. He's going to put his head down and get to the rim. And that's, two things that I think will get him, more minutes if need be. And I think he's gonna be important. I think he's gonna be important, and he's probably my top stock up guy. I'm not gonna do full stock up, stock down on the roster, but I like what I've seen from Aaron Eulis. And I think today's game against St. Mary's could be a game for him to shine a little bit, given how St. Mary's is so damn fundamentally sound, and they do all those little things right. So we can transition into the St. Mary's preview. This is my first preview attempt of the year. We're going to see if I've still got my fastball when it comes to previewing teams. I did this a couple times a season ago. Going to be looking to do it more so now. Could not track down any dedicated St. Mary's people. I wanted to do these previews as well as I can, but we're going to see if old Bigelow's got a solo preview in the holster that he can still fire it off. So we're going to start. St. Mary's. They have been in Gonzaga's shadow in the West Coast Conference for as long as I can remember. But I think Randy Bennett has a case to be the most underrated coach in the country, and that comes with just how hard his guys play, how smart they play. They're damn good, and they're gonna probably hear their names called on Selection Sunday. That program is one of the more underappreciated programs in America, I think, especially with an underappreciated coach. Looking at their analytics, And like I said, analytics are skewed. It was 3 games into the season, but there are some things I trust. Looking at St. Mary's, and that's that they're a top 20 offense. I believe that they're going to play smart. They're going to play smooth. They're going to make the right reads, all that stuff. They're the number 5 offensive rebounding team in the country. And that, I think, for Nebraska is nightmare fuel. I'm sure that was the top of the scouting report, regardless of who had the scout for this game. But I'm sure they were doing a lot of shell drill this week and other rebounding drills, whatever Nate Lenzer's got in the Rolodex of your rebounding drills, because that's gonna be paramount. We've talked about this Nebraska team, the size they have, how big they are, and it's gonna be a battle on the boards. I mean, this is gonna feel like a Big Ten game. I mean, this is going to be Nebraska. It's not going to be the first Big Ten game in the record book, but it's going to feel like it, and it's going to look like it, just based on the style of play. St. Mary's is 3-0 with wins over Towson, Chattanooga, and Akron. They were a little sluggish against, in those first couple. They, beat Towson by 7 at home. They beat Chattanooga by 8, and then they kind of had to get right with a 19-point win against a pretty solid Akron team on Tuesday night out in Northern California. They are led by international flavor. That's kind of that's always been the word of the day with St. Mary's, and they still have plenty of it. And it starts with Paulius Morauskas, 6'8", sophomore. He's their leading scorer right now. He's Lithuanian. I watched him kind of give Berke Buktinjel the business in some Euro Cup action, Lithuania, Turkey, Euro Cup action. But these guys are all just tough. Like, it's like he's a tough son of a gun. Like, that's almost every guy on this St. Mary's roster. But the first 3 guys I'm going to mention especially are tough sons of guns. And that is Paulius Morauskas and Augustus Marshallonis, especially. Augustus Marshallonis is the straw that stirs the drink. He's the son of Sojournas Marshallonis, good stock. NBA dad. He's their point guard. He's the straw that stirs the drink. He's their second leading scorer. Morauskas is at 18 points per game and 13 rebounds a game. That is ridiculous. He's going to do most of his work inside of the 3-point line, playing in the paint. And he'll also be looking to get fouled and get to the line. Marshallonis is sitting at 16 points a game and almost 9 assists per game. That is, these stats are skewed because it's early in the season, but he's a damn good point guard. And Raleigh Worcester is, he's not going to have his work cut out for him. Raleigh Worcester actually is the only player on Nebraska's roster who has faced St. Mary's before. Last season, Utah, the Fighting Craig Smiths, played a true road game in Moraga, and Raleigh Worcester had a team-high 17 points and 8 rebounds in a game that Utah won 78-71 at St. Mary's last year. But we're still talking about the Gales. That's a little shout out to Raleigh. Raleigh, I think this is going to be a big game for him. D'ing up on Marshallonis and then on the glass. Raleig's going to have to, it's going to have to be the best game he's played so far. Plain simple. He's going to have to be on it for Nebraska. So Morauskas and Marshallonis, they are the Lithuanians, but I think the third most important player is Mitchell Saxon, and he had a big role for St. Mary's last year. He comes back, 6'10" senior, and you're going to look at his stats, and you're going to see 8 points and 4 boards, but just his presence. His presence is going to, the matchup dependent, obviously, but I don't know if I want Berke Buktinjel going at Mitchell Saxon inside. I don't know, trying to go at him, go to the rim. I really like his tape. I just really like this St. Mary's team's tape in general. They're tough, man. They're tough. This is going to be, there's a chance this game could be really ugly for Nebraska. I know it's going to be a very predominant, pro Nebraska crowd today. There's going to be, there's not going to be, aside from friends and family, there's not going to be just St. Mary's fans who made the trip. This is going to be a Nebraska, de facto home game. But there's a world where this gets ugly. I really and truly believe there is a world where this game gets ugly. And it's just with, I mean, those three players alone could make it ugly just because of how smart they play, how tough they are. And then the guy who had a big night against Akron for St. Mary's is Mikey Lewis, 6'3" guard from Oakland. So in the neighborhood, from where St. Mary's is. Lewis is sitting at 14 points a game. He's their third leading scorer. I don't think he's their third most important player, but he's a 6'3" freshman from Oakland. He had a big game the other night against Akron. He had 18, had 14 in their second game, 10 in their season opener. He's, he, he'll be the smallest guard on the floor for sure, between the two teams, with the size that Nebraska has. But those four are the main. They're the dudes, I think, on this team. Luke Barrett's averaging 11, 46% from the field. Mikey Lewis, I will say this, 43% from three. So he may be chucking them. So I'm interested to see what the defense for Nebraska. I'm interested to see how they attack this team, because I really don't think the scramble drill, at the 3-point line is going to work. I think the personnel and the defense is going to be paramount for Nebraska. I mean, they're going to be ready to play the minute they get off the bus. They're up there already. They had a walk through, on Saturday, so that we know that. But I mean, the more I look at this St. Mary's team, I watched the Akron game. I watched parts of their first two games. I mean, they're good. They're good, man. Like, I don't know how deep they're gonna go in the NCAA tournament. I mean, I'm interested to see the battles they're gonna get in with Gonzaga when they play Gonzaga twice. St. Mary's, they also play USC in a couple weeks. They play Utah again in Salt Lake, return game there. Boise State, Utah State. I mean, they've got some interesting games on their non-con that I'm definitely going to be tuned into, but especially this Nebraska game tomorrow. So they're just. I mean, Fred Hoiberg called it a hard hat lunch pail game. I mean, it's going to be. I'm not saying it's going to be like street fight, like 2014 Nebraska Cincinnati vibes, where the final score was like 55-53 in double overtime. I don't know about that, but this game's going to be a battle. It's going to be a hard nose, like it's going to feel like a boxing match, in my opinion. Like, whoever lands the first punch, I mean, all those cliches, comparing boxing to basketball, but I think they're going to be pretty evident on Sunday, today in Sioux Falls. I think they're going to be pretty prevalent. So, looking at some projections, analytics wise, Ken Palm says St. Mary's 74-70. Torvik says St. Mary's 70-69. And Evan Miyakawa says St. Mary's 70-71. So they're all, I don't know how much they take like the neutral court thing into account, given the different analytics sites. The spread opened at 2.5 in favor of St. Mary's, and that is now 3.5 in favor of the Gales, with an over-under of 138.5. So that's kind of taking a look at St. Mary's. I mean, it doesn't take much to say this is going to be the toughest team Nebraska's played so far. It's definitely an upgrade. It's definitely a step up. They're number 42 in the country on Ken Palm. They're number 40 on Torvik. I mean, it's quite a steep step up. This is a team that's going to be playing postseason basketball. They're a team that's got dudes. They're a team that's tough as hell. I mean, Nebraska. I mean, they're gonna. I mean, if they play like they did, that they have in parts of the first three games, this could be ugly. And I'm not going to predict that it's going to be ugly, but I mean, it's going to be. I mean, if the threes aren't falling for Nebraska, I don't know if they can get into a street fight with St. Mary's and just try to play the can we get to the free throw line game as our best offense. That may be a recipe for disaster. I kind of tend to feel like the analytic projections feel that it could be a close game. ESPN BPI, St. Mary's 51% chance to win, Nebraska 48% chance to win. And like I said, I don't know how much these analytics take the crowd into account, because I'll say this: the Pentagon is a shooter's gym. It's a small arena. It feels like a high school gym. It's going to be all Nebraska fans, and if we need any evidence of the water getting turned on and threes falling, just look at what Amy Williams' crew did to South Dakota last night in this same arena where they, they made 23s on 34 attempts, a program record. They scored the fourth most points in program history in a 113-70 win over South Dakota. And it's not a 1-for-1 comparison, but I mean, if you're looking to get your mind right and get the shots to fall, maybe a shooter's gym could be the place for the water to get turned back on. Well, not back on, get turned on in general from three for the Nebraska men's basketball team. And we will see at noon on Big Ten Network, Nebraska St. Mary's. Definitely the first big test of the season for Fred Hoiberg's Huskers. And I don't really do game predictions. I think, I alluded to it as much. I mean, there's a world where this game gets ugly. There's a world where the water gets turned on, and Nebraska is finally making and taking and making threes. And we'll see how it goes on Sunday. I'll be in the building. I will say tune in to the After Nebraska Ball show on the I-80 Club and the Husker Max YouTube channels. We'll be doing the postgame show with Jack Mitchell and Caleb Henry live from the Pentagon on Sunday afternoon around 2:15 is when we're going to get going there. And depending on how it goes, there will probably be a second pod on this feed. Just my own reactions, my own takeaways, and thoughts from the Pentagon, which is one of my favorite places that I've watched basketball in. I've been all over this great country, into plenty of places to watch basketball, and the Pentagon, maybe top 5, maybe Mount Rushmore of places that I've watched college basketball before. Nebraska St. Mary's, there's my attempt at a preview. There's me talking Nebraska, big picture so far. So we can wrap it up with some other like big picture college basketball stuff that's been going on. I was lucky enough to be in the building for a Game of the Year candidate, Kansas, North Carolina. Some things you just have to do when there's a top 10 matchup 3 hours down the road. I'll take the hint in my bank account. I'll take the dent for the experience. Carolina hadn't been to Kansas since 1960. They hadn't played in the regular season since 1980. It was really, really cool. It was a really fun game. Kansas holds on. They blew a 20-point lead. Carolina took the lead, became a little bit of a tension convention, but the Jayhawks get that win. They're now 4-0 on the season. They defeated Michigan State in the Champions Classic. My biggest takeaway so far is in big picture, when I look at the national picture in college basketball, I don't really. I mean, there's definitely not a dominant team, but trying to tier it out, like the upper echelon, is going to be pretty hard, I think. I mean, and you can't make any sweeping declarations this early in the season. I feel like I've a broken record. I've said that so many times. But going into this week, I thought Alabama was the best team in the country. I thought they were the deepest team. I thought they had the highest ceiling. And then they go to Mackey Arena and lose by 9 to Purdue. Purdue without Zach Edey. Trey Kaufman-Renn goes nuts after what I've said about him on this very show with Tate Frazier and other people talking Big Ten at large. He goes for 26 on Alabama, and Braden Smith has 17 and 10 assists, and Fletcher Lawyer has 17 too. And then CJ Cox, that sequence from CJ Cox that kind of not blew the game open, but got that crowd rolling. When Mackey Arena's rolling, it's the best arena in the conference by far. I mean, that was an awesome basketball game, and that's a huge early season win for Purdue. But I mean, I thought Alabama should have won that game going away. And then the other game of the night on Friday night, not aesthetically, do not go back and watch it, but Arizona goes on the road to Madison, Wisconsin, gives up 103 points and loses by 15 to a Wisconsin team that is clearly not who I thought they were. They have impressed me and then some, which is crazy because last season, early season Wisconsin, it was like they're not running the swing. They might actually play real offense. And then we saw how that season ended. The story of the game in that Arizona-Wisconsin game, there were 87 free throws shot. Yes, you heard that right, 87. That's abhorrent. That is repulsive. That is disgusting. Fellow Omaha Central Eagle, John Tonje, finished with 41 points, too shy of Frank Kaminsky's program record at Wisconsin, but 21 of those 41 points were on free throws because he shot 22 free throws. That's crazy, man. That's insane. But that win for Wisconsin, I mean, that's another game where I thought Arizona should win this game going away, and now I have to reevaluate what I think about these teams in the Big Ten, these teams at large. I mean, Arizona was number 9. They go to Madison and lose. Arizona's got to come back and play Duke at the McHale Center in Tucson on Friday. There's just so many questions. This is just it's a long, strange trip to get to the Final Four, to get to the end of the year, even to get to the big dance. We got such a long way to go, but it's this is going to be a really chaotic, college basketball season. I think it's going to kind of mirror what we've seen with college football this year. I don't think there's not one dominant team. I don't think there's going to be one dominant league either. It's going to be like a member measuring contest between fans of certain conferences. Like get ready to hear, the middle of the league doesn't suck, the bottom doesn't suck. It just the league just cannibalizes itself. Everybody beats up on everybody. Like that's going to be a common refrain in college basketball this season when people are trying to conference cheer and conference root. I have to talk about this too, and I know it happened, close to a week ago now, but the Auburn-Houston game and everything that went into that. Auburn's flight had to land early because guys were fighting on the plane. There was blood. If you go listen to the pilot, the pilot talking to air traffic control, we got a lot of basketball players fighting. There's blood. We're going to have to land. Like, that is enough. Auburn's the number 5 team in the country. Houston, this was more than a week ago now. Auburn was number 11. Houston was number 4 when this game took place. The team that had a fight on the plane and had to land early won. They beat Houston at the Toyota Center, not at the Fertitta Center on Houston's campus. They played in the arena where the Rockets play. But that game, and if people ever ask, why in the world do you watch college basketball this early in the season, just point at that game. Everything that goes into that. You have two rabid pit bulls of coaches in Bruce Pearl and Kelvin Sampson. One team got into a fight on the plane. They play 2 very contrasting styles of basketball, and just everything that went into that was incredible. When I tell people why I watch college basketball, it's for games like that. Champions Classic was also this week. Kentucky beats Duke. I don't think enough people were talking about Kentucky going into the season, and you may look and say they were a preseason top 25 team. What the hell do you mean? I think they could be pretty good. They could not maybe even really good. And I know that goes against the stigma, the sentiment. Year one, new coach, new roster in college hoops. How good could they be? I think they've got a high ceiling. And on the subject of conference cheering, I think right now the SEC may be the best conference in college basketball, and that is not just because Garth Glissman came on this podcast. It's because teams in that conference have shown me the most so far, and they're the teams with a lot of upside in the long run appear to be teams in the SEC, in my opinion, and that includes Alabama, even after the loss to Purdue. So there's been a lot that's happened so far, and I'm going to be more consistent with talking about the things that have happened on this podcast. Once again, I apologize, for 2 weeks. There will not be a 2-week gap between podcasts ever again on this show. That is a promise from me. It's the middle of the season, and I can, guarantee you, no matter how today goes in Sioux Falls, we're turning it up for Creighton Week. We're going to have 2 preview podcasts, one with Jacob Padilla from Hurrdat Sports. He will become the second returning guest on the pod, my former podcast co-host. It's going to be good to talk previewing Creighton, Nebraska, the women's game and the men's game with Jacob, and then also with John Walker, new friend of the show, John Walker from the Omaha World Herald. He will be on to preview CU, both the women's game and the men's game. We're going to talk about both because it's a doubleheader on Friday in Omaha. Women's game at 4:00 at DJ Sokol Arena. Men's game at 7 at the big arena downtown. So we'll get there Friday. It's going to be an interesting week around here. Leading into that, and then with everything that's going on with Nebraska football at the moment as well, there will be plenty of interesting discourse to lead into that. So my apologies once again for a little bit of a layoff. I hope you're listening to this on the drive to Sioux Falls. If you're not, you'll have plenty of chances to hear my thoughts on this the game today. Like I said, after Nebraska ball, we'll try to have something up on this feed as well. Sometimes life happens, but my life this time of year involves a lot of basketball. I did not forget about the listeners. I appreciate anyone who is tuning in, anyone who anticipated, or anyone who reached out and asked where the podcast is. If this is your first time tuning in, if you needed a little pregame listening before the St. Mary's contest, you can follow me on Twitter at Jacob A. Bigelow. You can follow me over on Blue. I'm on the Blue Sky app too. You can go find me on there. Just search Jacob Bigelow. I'm there. You can follow the show at Stretch Big Pod on Twitter. You can email the show, stretchbigpodcast@gmail.com. Big thanks to Bird Darts for continuing their support of the program throughout the year. And you can check out some stuff from me as well at huskersillustrated.com. You subscribe to the magazine if you feel like. There's plenty of ways to find me this basketball season. I'm like the Johnny Cash song. I've been everywhere, and I continue to be everywhere. So if you enjoy listening to me talk a little basketball, there's plenty of more ways to go find it. Go subscribe to After Nebraska Ball on YouTube. Go subscribe to the I-80 Club. Go subscribe to Huskers Illustrated. Go listen to the radio shows that I go on all the time, or you can just stick to the podcast. If you're supporting the podcast, you're appreciated as is. But big thanks again to everybody for tuning in. I hope you're listening to this on the drive. And Nebraska St. Mary's. This is going to be interesting. And college basketball at large is already getting weird, and we have not even gotten to Thanksgiving yet. But that's fine with me. It is still my favorite time of the year. And we'll talk to you later today. A little Sunday doubleheader. This was the preview, and we'll have post-game thoughts from the Pentagon as well. Talk to you later.